Hey, what's going down? So this is booking breakdown number 3. I realized WrestleMania season means WrestleMania, of course, and this is number 37. I am old. I remember seeing WrestleMania 1, the first one on videotape. The second one, my father got me and a friend or two tickets to the Neil Blaisdell concert hall, basically where they would have the orchestra play. And we watched on closed circuit. And then WrestleMania 3 was the first thing we ever watched in our house pay-per-view wise. We had a cable box, and you had to go and get something to de-scramble it so you could see WrestleMania 3. Old. And looking at the booking for this year's WrestleMania's 2-night event, I wanted to look back. I was like, what could I do? And then I've seen all this stuff about, like, with the original poster of WrestleMania, which I have in the thumbnail, and I thought, without like looking at the event, I've seen WrestleMania. They've seen the first WrestleMania a trillion times. I had like the WrestleMania box set, and I love wrestling, so I've watched it a trillion times. So I thought, without mentally trying to pick it apart right now, let me just look at WrestleMania and see how it holds up from a booking perspective in the modern time. Cool. So I'm going to call up the card here. So I obviously have it to refer to. I'm going to try to have this thing not go too long. It's 9 matches long, right? If you could divide this card up. So here are the 9 matches. Tito Santana defeated the Executioner by submission, right? Figure 4 leg lock, singles match. Yeah. Time. Less than 5 minutes long. This thing was a hit it and quit it thing. WWF was trying to change how wrestling was done. If you look, there is not a match on this thing that goes, the longest match is the tag team main event of 13 minutes and 34 seconds. What the fuck? Every one of these matches is 6 minutes long or less, with the exception of, unbelievably, Brutus Beefcake versus David Sammartino. The fuck? So let's go through the card. 9 matches, which means you can break it up into 3 acts. And it really does break down into opening match stuff, mid-card match stuff, and main event stuff nicely in the 3 matches. Tito Santana against Executioner by submission is an opening match. Executioner had no chance of winning. This was their way of presenting Tito Santana to the world at large. Not that it was his first match in WWF or anything like that, but again, they had a huge audience for this, okay? They had 1 million closed circuit buys around the country, and they had about 19,000 people there live. But really, it was about that closed circuit gate. That's what changed the game. That's what led to pay-per-view. That's what led to all this stuff. Nobody knew it could happen like that. And they wanted to open with something that would promote. Now, did this give Tito Santana a bump? You're damn right it did, because he ended up winning the Intercontinental title. Yeah. So booking-wise, definitely a great move. Their second match, King Kong Bundy with Jimmy Hart against Special Delivery Jones. This match lasted 25 seconds. This is what I like to call in booking a palate cleanser. So imagine you're coming in and you're like settling in. You're settling in, right? And you're used to wrestling cards going very long. And you're like, okay, I'm going to just settle in. But they didn't want that. What did they want? They wanted an event that was like movie length, not pro wrestling show length, which is usually 3 hours. And for big shows, we even get up to 4 hours, don't we? They wanted people who were sitting there in closed circuit to not be bored. And they wanted them to have energy, especially for the last 3 matches, which were all kind of billed as main events. Yeah. So by having that palate cleanser second thing, 2 things it does. 1, it lets you know, oh my God, we're already through 2 things. I'm good, man. I had 7 more matches. I'm down with it, right? That's what a palate cleanser does. What's the other thing the palate cleanser does? Tito Santana's put over, but he has a bit of a match. King Kong Bundy is put over. What does this lead to for King Kong Bundy over the next year? He teams with Big John Studd, who's in one of our 3 main events. He becomes a big, huge deal, and they end up giving him to Bobby Heenan, because Bobby Heenan was seen as more of like a main event style manager. And King Kong Bundy headlines next year's WrestleMania 2, with Hulk Hogan. You see the power of a palate cleanser match even on a big show. My God, I'm really shocked that this WrestleMania is booked out so well. I'm not saying the match quality, I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about from a booking perspective and moving things forward. So the first match, which is a crowd-pleasing match, right? Tito Santana wins in decisive fashion, ends up winning the Intercontinental title. King Kong Bundy wins in a squash in a palate cleanser match, as I call it, and ends up headlining next year's WrestleMania. These are the opening match guys. Third one, Ricky Steamboat defeating Matt Bourne in a singles match that goes about the same length as the Tito Santana match. Ricky Steamboat, who would go on to win the Intercontinental title later on at WrestleMania 3. So, would you say those opening matches succeeded? You're goddamn right. It moved Tito Santana up in the eyes of the fans so they could give him the Intercontinental title. It got King Kong Bundy to the main event of next year's event. And for Ricky Steamboat, it paved the way for him to win the Intercontinental title as well at WrestleMania 3. Literally, they've set themselves up. Yeah, great job. Now we reached in the mid-card portion. And, by the way, total time of those matches, 10 minutes. So now we're already through the show, and we've gone 10 minutes in time. Now, WrestleMania also had a lot of gaga, had a lot of celebrities. I'm going to talk about that stuff too. Now we hit the 4th match, and this nothing lets you know that you're in a different part of the card than you have your first long match. In this case, a long match is 11 minutes, 43 seconds, the second longest match on the card, with Brutus Beefcake, who then was green as goose shit, with Johnny Valiant at ringside for him. That way, Johnny Valiant and Bruno Sammartino could kind of continue their little thing they had going. But it's Brutus Beefcake against David Sammartino, and it ends in a double disqualification. What was the purpose of this? Obviously, so they could do this match around the horn at house shows. David Sammartino wasn't with them that much longer after this, unfortunately. But what was this match really about? It really wasn't about the match between Brutus Beefcake and David Sammartino. This was about getting Bruno in that building for MSG and also bridging old fans with a new way of doing things. Bruno Sammartino sold out Madison Square Garden more than any other wrestler ever. And they wanted him on the card, and they weren't going to have him wrestle, so they had David wrestle Brutus Beefcake. They had it end in a double disqualification, so there was no real consequence to the match, because it was really about the interplay between Johnny Valiant and especially highlighting Bruno Sammartino. Yeah, this match went a long time, which might shock people. Why would you keep out, especially guys who were, let's just say, not necessarily the best in the ring in Brutus Beefcake and David Sammartino? Why? Because it was all about Bruno. They didn't want the crowd to feel cheated. They wanted Bruno out there more. And they put this match early enough so they could kind of, let's just be brutally honest, get it out of the way. Okay. Now you had the first title match, which was for the Intercontinental title, Junkyard Dog, Greg Valentine with Jimmy Hart again. It makes you realize what a big, hairy deal Jimmy Hart was, right? He's managing two of the guys so far, and how manager heavy things were back then. You've got Jimmy Hart, Johnny Valiant, Bruno Sammartino, who's basically serving as a manager, Jimmy Hart again, Fred Blassie, Lou Albano, Bobby Heenan, Fabulous Moolah, Cyndi Lauper, and then at ringside for the main, you got Bob Orton and Jimmy Snuka. Holy shit. Boy, did they love their people at ringside. The theme of this WrestleMania was more the better, and that included celebrities. They had celebrities, everything from like Billy Martin as a guest timekeeper, Muhammad Ali as a guest special referee, Liberace doing stuff. I mean, it was bonkers, you know. So in this fifth match, which is right dead center in the card, you've got an Intercontinental title match. This one's 7 minutes. So you see these mid-card matches are going a little bit longer. Yeah. Opening matches, less than 5 minutes, less than 30 seconds, less than 5 minutes. Then once you have that 11-minute 43-second match, it's like, oh no, we need to move things along again. That was the mentality. So that way the closed circuit crowd who weren't necessarily wrestling fans, we didn't want them to get restless. So we have a title match thing, the very charismatic Junkyard Dog, Intercontinental Championship, so it feels like it's a big deal. But they didn't want to take the title off of Greg Valentine because who was going to beat Greg Valentine? Tito Santana, who won the opener. But they didn't want Junkyard Dog to look bad because they considered him one of the top 3 to 5 baby faces that they had. So they had to win by countout. And then they explained that the title could not switch hands on the countout. Why did they need to have this Intercontinental title match? Because Hulk Hogan was the champion and wasn't defending the title on the first huge show for the WWF, Vince McMahon's WWF. Isn't that crazy to think of? People don't ever talk about that, but Hulk Hogan didn't defend his title at the first WrestleMania. Could you imagine having a WrestleMania without one of the 2 world titles being defended, or both of them not being defended? It would be unthinkable. But back then, the spectacle, getting to have Mr. T as his partner, all of that, this wasn't about booking a wrestling card to make wrestling purists happy. This was about a spectacle and getting mainstream attention, and it spectacularly succeeded at both. Yeah. That brings up this thing for bookers. What is the goal of your show? And if you don't have a goal for your show, get a goal and work towards it. Next match, the last one of the mid-card. Tag Team Championship match for the WWF Tag Team Championship lasted just under 7 minutes, just like the Intercontinental match. Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov defeating the U.S. Express, Barry Windham and Mike Rotundo, who were the champions with Lou Albano. Why this? Because you've got to have a downer. You've got to have a downer, especially going into those 3 main events. You've got to put stakes on the table. And look at this. Babyface, these are the order of the victories, right? Babyface, squash match heel. Babyface, double DQ. Babyface goes over but doesn't win the title. And then in the last 3 matches, babyface, babyface, babyface over. So you got to kind of balance the scales a little bit. You want people to have some kind of tension going into those last 3 matches. And so they have Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov win those tag titles, which ends up being a really great thing for them. Keep in mind, too, this is right when the WWF was about to go into an A and B show format. And traditionally, the tag team champions, especially if they were heel against the babyface Hogan world champion, would headline that B show. And so it was seen as Barry Windham and Mike Rotundo. Gosh, crazy to think, right? Barry Windham, so great. Would go on to much more prominent success in a way with Crockett Promotions. But Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov would headline those B shows against a slew of babyface tag teams that they had, Killer Bees amongst them. Yeah. So again, they go over, and now people are like nice and hot and bothered for the last 3 matches, which are main event. What's the point of the main event? Create the hype and then live up to the hype. We'll see if these matches did just that. None of these things are that long, right? Except for the main. Andre the Giant and Big John Studd in the $15,000 Body Slam Challenge, which had been set up for a long time. This idea of, can Big John Studd be body slammed? They had had months of people trying to body slam him on television and not able to do it. Andre the Giant here is going to take up the challenge. Of course, Big John Studd is going to fight him every step of the way, but Andre the Giant, of course, does end up in one of the great WrestleMania moments, picks him up. In fact, you could argue it was the first great WrestleMania moment, though you could say King Kong Bundy squashing S.D. Jones might have been that as well. But really, that image of Andre the Giant picking him up, slamming him down, but then doing something really cool, which is he takes that $15,000 and then he starts taking it out of the bag and throwing it out to the crowd. It's one of those moments that felt really special. One of those moments that told us more about Andre the Giant for people who had never seen him before. Keep in mind, they're booking this with, we're introducing all of these people to a wider audience. You know, did that work? Yes. The idea of this gentle giant and this incredibly gracious man who, instead of just being like, yeah, I won this money, is like, dude, it wasn't about winning the money. It was about conquering. It was about rising to a challenge. Here's the money. And then they have Bobby Heenan in heel fashion grab that bag. And honestly, they just didn't want to throw all that money out to the crowd, of course. But Bobby Heenan grabs that money and runs away with it. And it's a great moment. So it definitely lives up to the hype. It definitely created a lot of hype, and it lived up to the hype. It was, in fact, what did Big John Studd end up getting to do, even in defeat on this thing? He teams with King Kong Bundy, and then they headlined a bunch of shows against Andre the Giant and Hulk Hogan in tag matches from WrestleMania, from the first WrestleMania to the second WrestleMania. So they got to make a lot of money together, a lot of money. Wendy Richter with Cyndi Lauper, and this thing had been on hype on MTV and a million other ways leading up to this. Leilani Kai is the champion with the fabulous Moolah in the corner. I thought it was a good move here not to go with Moolah against Richter again, but Leilani Kai was the champ. Wendy Richter goes over with Cyndi Lauper helping, of course, along the way, preventing the fabulous Moolah from interfering, all this kind of rigmarole. The finish, I think, is really strange, and it shows how far women wrestling has come, because back then it was still seen as very much a sort of an attraction and a sideshow. It was really treated that way. So the finish was, I went and looked because I was curious, like, what did Wendy Richter have a finisher? They didn't give her, like, I hate this finish, but it worked. Leilani Kai hits a crossbody from the top rope. Wendy Richter rolls through and gets the pin. But then again, I get it, because they're really setting things up for the guys in the main event. But Wendy Richter goes over at a time of 6:14, and I remember this match because I remember just how hyped the crowd was for everything. Why? One, the Wendy Richter thing was promoted really well, and Cyndi Lauper was there, who was like basically Soho back then was kind of a district of New York where there was like the really artsy district, and Cyndi Lauper definitely embodied that. Again, a lot of the WWF's audience, which is what drove purists crazy, was the kind of like New York, like hipster irony crowd. They're coming up the heels of Warhol. Remember this. And so wrestling was seen as, not wrestling in general. The WWF at this time was seen by a large section of the viewing audience and the potential viewing audience, especially in the New York area, as a sort of like hip, edgy, weird thing. You know, they had Tuesday Night Titans where they were doing all this odd vignettes and promos and all this kind of, and it was in a talk show format. It was really nutty. So this match was definitely a big part of people buying and being interested in WrestleMania. So Wendy Richter goes over. Everybody's happy. What happens from here? Fabulous Moolah, Wendy Richter wanted too much money, and WWF are assholes. And so Fabulous Moolah, as the Spider Lady, puts on a mask and does basically a shoot against Wendy Richter. Wendy Richter doesn't realize it's Moolah, and Moolah takes the title back and ends up holding on to it for a couple more years. Women's wrestling is basically dead in the water after Wendy Richter loses the title to the Spider Lady / Fabulous Moolah. Yeah. And really, If you look at the history of WrestleMania and women's wrestling, there's not even a women's wrestling match on there for years and years. And then you have our main event. Hulk Hogan and Mr. T with Jimmy Snuka at ringside, which I'll explain in a second, against Paul Orndorff and Roddy Piper with Bob Orton. The infamous Piper's Pit, they used the Piper's Pits to really promote this match. Roddy Piper hit Jimmy Snuka with a coconut. That led to the two of them feuding. And then Piper ran down Hulk Hogan and Mr. T at different intervals, which led to this match. Yeah, that's why Piper's Snuka's at ringside. Bob Orton is also at ringside. And then we'll talk about where they went from here. But Paul Orndorff, Roddy Piper, Bob Orton. Remember, he's got the cast on. So the finish is Bob Orton comes off the top rope, but messes up, accidentally hits Orndorff, who gets pinned. Is it a great, spectacular wrestling match? Not by any stretch, but it does have its amusing moments, and the crowd completely goes apeshit for stuff. When Mr. T gets in there and does an airplane spin, they definitely protect Mr. T in this thing. So was it a success? I don't know. Did they have 1 million closed circuit buys? Yes. Did it stop the WWF from completely collapsing financially? Because keep in mind, they pushed everything towards this. They had lost the Georgia television deal, but they'd gotten paid off 1 million, and that went to this WrestleMania. Everything went to this WrestleMania. Yeah. Hulk Hogan choked out Richard Belzer on his talk show. By the way, Hulk Hogan had to pay a settlement out of that thing. Was it worth it? All this hype, all this hubbub. Did people plunk down their money to go see it on closed circuit television around the country? Absolutely, they did. It's the thing that created Vince McMahon's WWF and sustained it, and has led to the point where they're not even, you can even call them a wrestling company. They're just a content provider that makes billions of dollars just providing television. And they're no longer at the mercy of pay-per-view sales, closed-circuit television sales, or even ticket sales anymore. And it all stems from the success of this WrestleMania. Where did these guys go from here? Hulk Hogan is still the champion, obviously. Ends up wrestling King Kong Bundy at WrestleMania 2. In between, he teams with Andre the Giant, who's one of the other main events, against Big John Studd and King Kong Bundy, who won the squash match. Roddy Piper goes on to teach Bob Orton to box, which leads to a thing with Mr. T, which leads to Roddy Piper and Mr. T having a boxing match at the second WrestleMania. And then after that, they realized they had to turn Piper face, so Piper is a baby face in the third WrestleMania. Paul Orndorff also had a very significant feud with Hulk Hogan that lasted. At one point, Paul Orndorff goes babyface against Roddy Piper, teams with Hulk Hogan for a time, and then turns on Hulk Hogan. And then they have a series of incredibly well-drawing matches against each other, Hulk Hogan and Paul Orndorff, to bridge WrestleMania 2 and WrestleMania 3. What can you say? How would I say WrestleMania is? As an event, some of the matches are not very good. The matches are not very long. And often the mid-card and the undercard, by today's standards, would feel like you're almost cheating your audience in many ways. However, how was it from a success standpoint and from a booking structure standpoint? Incredibly effective. They got what they wanted, which was an incredibly hyped crowd that felt completely satisfied with the ending of that. And it led to the incredible excess. And you're talking, think about this, 2, sometimes 3 traveling groups of wrestlers going to different parts of the country, selling out everywhere they're going. Now, different sized arenas, depending on whether it was the B team, the C team, or the A team, which usually had Hulk Hogan on top. But nonetheless, making all this money. There's some parts of the country they still weren't able to get into, the Virginias, the Carolinas at that time, but eventually they won it all, baby. Anyway, this has been the booking breakdown.